A paralyzed tech billionaire sat alone in a Chicago cafe on her 34th birthday. An untouched vanilla cake in front of her. A potted plant, her only companion. Then the door swung open. A single father and his 6-year-old son stepped inside, rain-soaked and searching for warmth. Before anyone could react, the boy walked straight to her table and whispered, "Daddy, she looks like she needs someone." What happened next cracked open a heart that had been locked shut for 2 years. Right there in the middle of Hearth and Grind Cafe, the father and son began singing "Happy Birthday," off-key but overflowing with warmth. For the first time since the accident that stole everything, Judith Hartley felt herself break. And what happened after that moment would unravel secrets buried for years, expose a grief she'd been hiding from the world, and change 3 lives in ways none of them could have imagined. But before we continue, tell us what time it is and where you're watching from. Subscribe and hit that notification bell, because tomorrow I've got something extraordinary for you. The rain came down hard over Chicago's Fulton Market District that late October afternoon. The kind of relentless downpour that turned the cobblestone streets into rivers of black and made the warehouse-turned-loft buildings look like fortresses against the storm. West Randolph Street shimmered with reflections, brake lights bleeding into puddles, taxis cutting through the deluge, umbrellas blown inside out and abandoned in trash cans. Inside Hearth and Grind Cafe on the corner of Morgan Street, the windows fogged with condensation, and the air smelled of dark roast espresso, maple-glazed croissants, and rain-soaked wool. Industrial pendant lights cast a warm amber glow over exposed brick walls and reclaimed wood tables. The cafe was half full. Freelancers hunched over laptops, a couple sharing a pot of French press, a construction crew on break arguing about the Bears' playoff chances. Before we continue, let me know where you're watching from the comments. I read every single one, and it's amazing seeing where this story is reaching. Judith Hartley sat alone at a corner table near the window, her wheelchair positioned carefully beside the booth. She was 34 years old today, though she felt ancient, as if the accident 2 years ago had aged her in ways that had nothing to do with time. Her blonde hair, still damp from wheeling herself through the rain, fell in soft waves around her face. She wore a cream wool turtleneck and a beige coat draped across her lap, covering legs that no longer obeyed her. Her hands rested on the table, fingers interlaced tightly, knuckles pale. In front of her sat a small layered vanilla cake decorated with berries. The barista, a college kid with sleeve tattoos and kind eyes, had written "Happy Birthday," Judith in shaky chocolate script when she'd quietly mentioned it was her birthday. No candles, no songs, no one waiting for her at home. Beside the cake sat a potted succulent in a ceramic planter. The barista had slid it over with a pitying smile, and Judith had named it Sherman on the spot, because even plants lived longer than the people she loved. She traced a finger along the edge of the plate and thought about Alexandra. Alexandra Reyes had been her business partner, her fiancée, her best friend since MIT. They'd built Hartley Innovations together, pioneering adaptive architecture software that made smart buildings accessible to people with disabilities. Billionaires before 30. Featured in Forbes. Keynote speakers at TechCrunch. Untouchable. Until Colorado. They'd gone hiking near Boulder to celebrate closing their Series C funding. Alexandra had been walking ahead on the trail, turning back to laugh at something Judith said when the rock slide hit. Judith remembered the sound, like the earth cracking open. Remembered Alexandra's scream, cutting off mid-breath. Remembered waking up in a Denver hospital 3 days later, unable to move from the waist down, and learning that Alexandra had died on impact. The doctors called it incomplete spinal cord injury. Nerves damaged, but not severed. She could feel pressure, sometimes pain, occasionally phantom sensations that made her think her legs were still hers. But controlled movement? Gone. Some days she could wiggle her toes. Most days, nothing. The wheelchair was necessity, not choice. Her mother, Catherine, had flown out immediately, stayed for 6 months. Helped Judith through physical therapy, through the nightmares, through the board meetings where investors whispered about succession plans. Catherine had refused to let Judith give up, even when Judith begged her to. And then Catherine had a stroke. Sudden, Brutal. Gone before the ambulance arrived. Judith's father, Jonathan Hartley, venture capitalist and emotional ghost, had sent flowers to the funeral. He was in Singapore. Couldn't get back in time. He'd sent flowers today, too. White roses, impersonal, with a card that read, "Happy birthday, sweetheart. Wish I could be there." Judith had thrown them in the trash. She stared at the cake and felt the familiar weight of isolation pressing down on her chest. Birthdays used to mean something. Alexandra planning surprise trips, Catherine baking her famous lemon bars, champagne toasts on rooftop bars overlooking Lake Michigan. Now birthdays were just reminders of what she'd lost, of what she'd never get back, of how completely alone she was. The cafe door chimed. Judith glanced up reflexively. A man stepped inside, shaking rain from the sleeves of a gray hoodie. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of quiet strength that came from years of hard work. His skin was a deep brown, his hair cut close, and his eyes, warm, watchful, tracked the small boy holding his hand. The boy was no older than 6, with tight curls and a bright yellow raincoat that looked like a burst of sunshine against the gray afternoon. Water dripped from his sleeves. His sneakers squelched with every step. They ordered hot chocolates at the counter, and the boy, David, Judith heard the man call him, talked excitedly about a train set he'd seen in a store window. Then David turned. His eyes landed directly on Judith, on the wheelchair, on the untouched cake, on the loneliness she thought she'd hidden so well. Before his father could stop him, David pulled free and walked straight toward Judith's table. His yellow coat swished. His sneakers left wet prints on the wood floor. He stopped in front of her, solemn and serious, and asked, "Excuse me, is it your birthday?" Judith blinked. Her voice felt rusty. Yeah, it is." David nodded once, like he'd already decided something important. "We should sing for you." The man, Joseph, Judith would learn, appeared beside his son, embarrassed. "David, buddy, no. I'm so sorry, ma'am." But Judith shook her head. Something in the boy's eyes, earnest, unafraid, made her want to say yes. "It's okay," she whispered. "Actually, I like that." Joseph looked at her, really looked, and saw something that made his expression soften. Not pity, not curiosity, recognition. He understood loneliness. He understood what it meant to need kindness desperately and be too proud to ask for it. He nodded once, then rested a hand on David's shoulder. "All right, buddy, let's do it." And then they sang, off-key, unpolished. David's enthusiasm carrying them through the verses, Joseph's deep voice providing a steady foundation. Other customers glanced over. Some smiled, others looked away with practiced city indifference. But Judith couldn't look away. She watched this little boy and his father sing happy birthday to a complete stranger, asking for nothing in return, simply offering joy because they believed everyone deserved it. David's curls bounced. Joseph's hand stayed steady on his son's shoulder, anchoring him, protecting him, letting him shine. When they finished, David clapped his hands together. "Make a wish." Judith closed her eyes. She didn't believe in wishes anymore, but she tried anyway, letting herself hope, just for a moment, that maybe life could feel less empty. When she opened her eyes, tears were streaming down her face. David's smile faded instantly, replaced by concern. I'm sorry. Did we hurt your feelings?" "No," Judith said, wiping tears with the sleeve of her coat. "No, sweetheart. You made my day. This is the most wonderful thing anyone's done for me in a very long time." David reached across the table and patted Judith's hand with the solemnity of someone far older than 6. "Good. Because birthdays should be happy. That's the rule." Joseph offered Judith a napkin from the dispenser. "I'm sorry if we overstepped." "You didn't," Judith said firmly, accepting the napkin. "Thank you. Both of you." "I'm Judith." "Joseph," he replied. His handshake was gentle but firm. "And this is my son, David." Judith hesitated, then pushed forward, taking a risk she hadn't taken in 2 years. "Would you both like to share this cake with me? It's too much for one person." David's eyes went wide with delight. "Really? We can." "I'd be honored," Judith said. They sat together for the next hour, sharing vanilla cake and stories. David told Judith about his fascination with trains, how he could name every model from the 1800s to now, and about dinosaurs, specifically pterodactyls, which he insisted were the coolest but not technically dinosaurs. He explained his theory that Sherman the succulent was actually an undercover spy plant. Judith laughed, genuinely, for the first time in months. Joseph spoke less, but when he did, his words were thoughtful and kind. He asked about her work. She kept it vague, mentioned tech consulting, accessibility software. He didn't ask about the wheelchair, didn't let his gaze linger on it with pity or curiosity. He treated her like a person, not a tragedy. That simple act of respect meant more than he could possibly know. When they finally stood to leave, David hugged Judith tightly, wrapping his small arms around her neck. "You're my friend now," he declared. Judith froze, then gently wrapped her arms around the little boy who somehow understood her better than the entire board of her company. "Thank you, David," she whispered. "More than you know." Joseph pulled on his hoodie, then paused at the door. He turned back, looking at Judith, not with pity, not with fear, but with something steady and quietly respectful. "Judith, if you ever need help with anything at all, here's my number." He scribbled on a napkin and slid it across the table. Judith hesitated. "What makes you think I'd ever need help?" Joseph smiled gently. "Because everyone does sometimes." She took the napkin. Their fingertips brushed. Something shifted, something neither of them could name. As Joseph and David stepped into the rain, Judith watched them go, feeling the emptiness return like a cold wind. But it felt different now. Lighter. Like maybe, just maybe, she could survive it after all. She wheeled herself home through the rain, and for the first time in 2 years, she went to bed on her birthday, feeling something other than despair. She felt hope. 10 days later, Judith was leaving her weekly physical therapy session at the Lakeshore Rehabilitation Center when the rain started again. Judith woke the next morning to pale November light filtering through her floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. The water stretched gray and endless, matching the sky. She lay still for a moment, feeling the phantom ache in her legs, the ghost of movement her body remembered but couldn't replicate. Her adapted apartment in the Gold Coast was a monument to efficiency. Lowered countertops, widened doorways, a roll-in shower with grab bars. Everything designed to make her independent. Everything reminding her she needed design to be independent. The last slice of birthday cake sat on her desk in a Tupperware container. She wheeled over, opened it, stared at the vanilla sponge that had somehow changed everything. Joseph. She didn't even know his last name, but she knew how to find people. Within an hour, Judith had her laptop open, fingers flying across the keyboard. She started broad, Joseph, single father, Chicago, construction, then narrowed it through community forums, LinkedIn, public records. Joseph Carter, age 38, Army veteran, honorably discharged. Former lead carpenter with Midway Restoration Group. Laid off 8 months ago when the company folded. Currently doing day labor through a temp agency. She found a GoFundMe page, 3 months old, barely funded. Help David and me stay housed. The description was brief, dignified, ashamed. Rent overdue. Utilities threatened. A 6-year-old who deserved better. Judith's chest tightened. She scrolled through his sparse LinkedIn, recommendations from former colleagues praising his craftsmanship, his leadership, his integrity. A profile photo of him and David at Navy Pier, both smiling, David clutching a stuffed dinosaur. She clicked to his public Facebook. Photos of David's school projects. A video of David explaining how bridges work. Joseph's comments full of pride and encouragement. No bitterness. No self-pity. Just a man trying to keep his son safe. Judith sat back, her hands trembling. She thought about her penthouse apartment, about the offshore accounts her financial advisors managed, about the trust fund she'd never touched because she'd built her own empire. She thought about Joseph singing Happy Birthday with worn-through shoes and a hoodie that had seen better years. Anger flooded her, not at Joseph, but at the system that discarded competent men the moment their companies folded. At the invisible machinery that decided some people deserved second chances and others deserved eviction notices. But underneath the anger was something else. Guilt. Why do I have to swoop in like some savior? He didn't ask for rescue. He asked for nothing. But then she remembered David's hand patting hers. Birthdays should be happy. That's the rule. This wasn't about rescue. This was about justice. Judith opened a new message draft, typed Joseph's email address from the GoFundMe page, then stared at the blank text field for 10 minutes. Finally, she wrote, Joseph, thank you again for yesterday. David's kindness meant more than I can express. I'd love to buy you both lunch sometime soon. Not as thanks, just as friends? Let me know if you're free this week. Judith. She hit send before she could overthink it. 20 minutes later, her phone chimed. Judith, David hasn't stopped talking about you. He drew you a picture, attached. Lunch sound great. Thursday, Joseph. She opened the attachment. A crayon drawing. 3 stick figures holding hands. One in a wheelchair. One tall. One small with a yellow blob that must be a raincoat. Above them, a rainbow. Below, in wobbly letters, FRENDS. Judith pressed her palm against her mouth and cried. Thursday. She had 4 days to figure out what came next. They met at the Grind on West Kinsey, a neighborhood cafe with wide aisles, and a ramp Joseph had noticed the last time they'd walked past it. Neutral territory. No expectations. David arrived wearing his yellow raincoat despite the clear sky, clutching a small cardboard box. I brought Sherman a friend, he announced, presenting Judith with a tiny cactus in a painted pot. His name is Captain Pokey. Judith laughed. A real, surprise sound that startled her. Captain Pokey. That's perfect. They ordered hot chocolates for David, coffee for the adults, and settled into a corner booth. David immediately launched into a story about a train video he'd watched 17 times. Joseph listened with practiced patience, occasionally redirecting David's enthusiasm when it threatened to derail entirely. His hands, calloused, scarred from years of work, cradled his coffee mug gently. Judith watched those hands and wondered what they'd built. So, Joseph said when David paused to demolish a muffin. What do you do, Judith? You mentioned tech consulting. She kept her answer vague. Accessibility software, design solutions, nonprofit partnerships. All true. None of it revealing the Forbes profile or the 9-figure valuation. What about you? She asked. Before everything, Joseph's expression shifted, pride mixed with grief. I was a carpenter, lead restoration specialist, actually, historic buildings, theaters, churches, old craftsman homes. The kind of work where you're matching century-old plaster techniques or restoring hand-carved trim. His voice warmed as he talked, hands gesturing to illustrate joinery methods, the satisfaction of bringing something beautiful back to life. My crew, we were good. Won a preservation award for a synagogue in Pilsen. But the company overextended, took on projects they couldn't fund. Folded overnight. Most of us were blacklisted by the bigger firms, guilt by association. Judith stopped herself from saying unfair. Joseph knew it was unfair. That's garbage. Yeah. Joseph smiled grimly. It is. But I've got David and I've got my hands. We'll figure it out. David looked up, muffin crumbs on his chin. Daddy's the best builder. He made me a castle bed. From scrap wood and YouTube tutorials, Joseph added. Kid deserves better. Kid seems pretty happy, Judith said softly. Joseph's eyes met hers, and something passed between them. Mutual recognition of survival, of loving someone so much it hurt, of waking up every day and choosing to keep going. What about you? Joseph asked. You said accessibility software. Personal interest. Judith hesitated, then decided truth deserved truth. I was a hiker, a climber. My fiancée and I. We were in Colorado when. She gestured at the wheelchair. Rock slide. She died. I didn't. Been 2 years, and I still don't know which one of us got the worst deal. Joseph didn't offer platitudes. Didn't say I'm sorry, or everything happens for a reason. He just nodded. My wife died 3 years ago, he said quietly. Cancer. Fast. David was 3. Some days I think he remembers her. Other days I'm terrified he's forgetting. They sat in the weight of that shared grief. David, oblivious to the darkness, announced, I remember Mommy's songs. Daddy sings them wrong, but I don't tell him. Joseph laughed, broken grateful. Judith reached across the table and squeezed his hand briefly. "Thank you," she said, "for not treating me like I'm fragile." "Thank you," Joseph replied, "for not treating me like I'm desperate." The conversation shifted lighter. David's obsession with pterodactyls, Judith's ridiculous succulent collection, Joseph's failed attempts at sourdough bread. Then Joseph mentioned, almost offhand, "I've been thinking about teaching. Maybe community workshops, historic restoration techniques, adaptive carpentry. There's kids in the neighborhood who could use skills." Judith's mind began racing. "Joseph, I'm sponsoring an event next week. Adaptive design demo. Accessibility in public spaces. Would you and David want to come? No pressure. I think you'd find it interesting." Joseph was silent for a moment, pride warring with curiosity. David saved him. "Can we go, Daddy? Please." Joseph looked at his son, then at Judith. "Yeah," he said finally. "We'll be there." Judith's physical therapy session that Thursday morning was brutal. Dr. Chun, her therapist at Lakeshore Rehabilitation Center, pushed her through standing exercises that left her shaking and drenched in sweat. "You're compensating with your upper body," Dr. Chun said, adjusting Judith's posture at the parallel bars. "Trust your core. Your legs will follow." Judith gritted her teeth and tried again. 5 seconds standing unassisted. Then 10. Her legs trembled but held. "Good," Dr. Chun said. "That's progress." Progress. Such a small, enormous word. That evening, the adaptive design workshop filled the community center on South Halsted. 50 people, families with disabled kids, architects, local contractors. Judith had funded the event through a nonprofit grant, kept her name off the promotional materials. She watched from the side as presenters demonstrated ramp designs, touch-responsive interfaces, sensory-friendly lighting. Joseph arrived with David just as the hands-on portion began. David immediately gravitated toward a model train set modified for wheelchair access. Joseph hung back, observing, until one of the organizers struggled to assemble a demonstration grab bar incorrectly. "Excuse me," Joseph said quietly, stepping forward. "That mounting bracket, it's backwards. You want the load-bearing plate against the stud." The organizer blinked. "Oh, you're right. Thanks. Need help?" Joseph asked. Within minutes, he'd reorganized the installation, corrected the anchoring method, and explained to a group of watching parents why certain modifications worked better than others. Judith watched him work, confident, competent, generous with his knowledge. Others noticed too. A woman from the city's planning commission approached him, asked about his background. An architect handed him a business card. After the event, Judith found Joseph packing up David's coat. "You were incredible tonight," she said. Joseph shrugged. "Just did what I know." "Joseph, what if it wasn't just one night?" He looked at her warily. "What do you mean?" "I have an idea. Let me work on something. Can we meet again soon?" "Judith, not charity," she said quickly. "A project. Real work. Fair pay. I just need to figure out the logistics." Joseph studied her face, looking for pity or condescension. He found neither. "All right," he said. "I'll listen." Later that night, Judith's assistant Marcus called. "The board's asking questions about your community involvement," he said carefully. "They want to know if you're mixing personal interests with company resources." Judith's jaw tightened. "Tell them I'm exploring strategic partnerships in adaptive construction. Completely above board." "Judith, I know what I'm doing, Marcus." She hung up and stared at her reflection in the window. She'd spent 2 years hiding. 2 years punishing herself. Not anymore. The coffee shop on Milwaukee Avenue was quiet on Tuesday morning. Judith arrived early, rehearsing her pitch in her head. Joseph sat across from her, David coloring at the next table. "There's a historic church in Pilsen," Judith began. "St. Adalbert's. Beautiful 1910 architecture, but it's crumbling. The parish can't afford proper restoration, and the city's threatening to declare it unsafe." Joseph nodded. He knew the building. "I want to fund a pilot project," Judith continued. "Historic restoration combined with adaptive accessibility upgrades. You lead a small crew, hire local apprentices, train them in traditional techniques while integrating modern accessibility standards." Joseph's expression hardened. "Judith, it's not charity," she said firmly. It's a 12-week contract. Fixed pay scale, same rate you'd get from any restoration firm. Measurable deliverables, documented before and after, budget transparency, skills training metrics. If it works, we expand the program. If it doesn't, we part ways professionally. Why me? Because you're qualified. Because you care. Because the system failed you, and I have resources to bypass that system, but only if you earn it. This isn't a handout, Joseph. This is a job. Joseph was quiet for a long time. I don't want special treatment. You won't get it. I'll publish every dollar spent, every hour logged. The community will see everything. The board will scrutinize everything. You'll have to prove yourself to everyone, including me. And if I fail, then you fail. But you won't. Joseph looked at David, who was drawing another picture of 3 stick figures. I need childcare coverage, Joseph said slowly. And I can't quit my temp work until I know this is real. First 2 weeks are trial period, half-time, flexible schedule. After that, if we both agree to continue, it goes full-time. I'll connect you with subsidized childcare resources. Joseph exhaled slowly. I want a written contract. Legal. Binding. Not a handshake deal. Absolutely. And if anyone implies I got this because of charity or friendship, I walk. Judith met his eyes. Deal. They shook hands. David looked up from his drawing. Are you and Daddy working together now? We are, buddy, Joseph said. David grinned and went back to his picture. Judith, Joseph, and David building something that looked like a house made of rainbows. Judith looked at it and thought, close enough. The Hartley Innovations boardroom on the 40th floor overlooked the Chicago River. Judith wheeled herself to the head of the conference table, her tablet loaded with project documentation. 8 board members stared back at her. Most supportive, 2 skeptical. Richard Pemberton, CFO, and her father's old golf partner, spoke first. Judith, we appreciate your passion for community investment, but this Joseph Carter hire raises questions. His resume has an 8-month gap. No references from major firms. We need to protect the company's reputation. Judith kept her voice level. Joseph Carter is a decorated Army veteran with 15 years of specialized restoration experience. His former employer collapsed due to fraud, not performance. I vetted him thoroughly. This pilot is merit-based with transparent oversight. Still, said Diane Voss, head of PR, the optics. The optics, Judith interrupted, are that we're investing in skilled tradespeople and accessible infrastructure. If anyone has a problem with that, they're welcome to explain why publicly. Diane's mouth thinned, but she nodded. I want weekly audits, Richard said. Budget, timeline, everything. Already planned, Judith replied. On-site at St. Adalbert's. Joseph moved through the space like he was reading a language others couldn't see. He ran his hands over cracked plaster, examined load-bearing beams, traced the elegant curve of Gothic arches. This cornicing is original, he told his crew of 3 apprentices, 2 high school seniors, and a recently laid-off tile worker. We're not replacing it. We're restoring it. That means mixing lime plaster the old way, matching the texture exactly. He demonstrated the technique, his hands sure and practiced. One of the apprentices, Miguel, asked, why not just use modern plaster? Because, Joseph said, this building deserves respect. It was built by people who cared about beauty, not just function. We're going to honor that. The first week went smoothly. The second week, they discovered termite damage in the north transept, structural beams compromised, threatening the entire timeline. Joseph called Judith. We've got a problem. She arrived within an hour. Joseph walked her through the damage, explained the options: full beam replacement, expensive, slow, or a steel reinforcement retrofit, faster, cheaper, historically sensitive. The retrofit maintains the original wood while adding hidden support, Joseph explained. Stronger than replacement, half the cost, and you'd never know it's there. Judith looked at the numbers. Do it. By week 3, word spread. The retrofitting technique became a case study. City inspectors praised the innovation. Diane quietly admitted to Judith, this is good PR. But then Richard leaked concerns to a local blogger. An article appeared, Billionaire's Wheelchair Guilt. Is Judith Hartley buying friends? Joseph read it on his phone during lunch break. His jaw clenched. David's teacher mentioned that some kids had asked if David's dad got a fake job from a rich lady. That night, Joseph called Judith. "I can't do this if people think I'm your charity case." "Then we prove them wrong," Judith said. Publicly. Completely. Judith published everything. Every contract. Every invoice. Every hour logged. Every material cost. She created a public dashboard tracking the project's progress, accessible to anyone with an internet connection. She wrote an op-ed for the Chicago Tribune. "I funded this project not because Joseph Carter is my friend, but because he's the most qualified person for the job. The real scandal isn't that I hired a veteran tradesman. It's that our industry discards skilled workers the moment they're inconvenient. Watch the work. Judge the results. The truth is in the beams." Community members who'd attended the workshop wrote testimonials. Miguel's mother posted photos of her son learning cornicing techniques. The parish priest gave an interview praising the crew's respect for the building's history. Slowly, the narrative shifted. One evening, as rain drummed against St. Adalbert's stained glass windows, Judith and Joseph sat in the empty sanctuary while David napped on a pew. "I need to tell you something," Judith said quietly. Joseph waited. "After the accident, after Alexander died, I wanted to die too. Not actively, just passively. I stopped trying, stopped caring. My mother kept me alive, and then she died, and I thought that was it. That was my punishment, living without anything worth living for." She looked at the restored plaster ceiling, at the work Joseph's hands had shaped. "David's singing to me. That was the first time I felt anything in 2 years. And I'm terrified I'm doing this for the wrong reasons. I'm trying to fix you to avoid fixing myself." Joseph was quiet for a long moment. "My wife's name was Angela," he said finally. "She was a nurse. Pediatric ICU. She loved kids more than anything, except maybe David. When she got sick, she made me promise I'd raise him to be kind. Not smart or successful or tough. Just kind." His voice cracked. "Every day, I wonder if I'm doing it right. If I'm enough. If David will remember her kindness or just my fear." He looked at Judith. "You're not fixing me, Judith. You're giving me a chance to prove I was never broken. There's a difference." Judith reached across the space between them and took his hand. Thunder rolled overhead. They sat in a sacred quiet, two people learning what it meant to be seen. The open house was scheduled for a Saturday in mid-December. St. Adalbert's transformation was nearly complete. Original plaster restored, accessibility ramps integrated seamlessly, touchscreen information panels installed at wheelchair height. The week before, Judith achieved something impossible. At Lakeshore Rehabilitation Center, Dr. Chun had her attempt walking with forearm crutches. Judith had tried before, dozens of times, always collapsing after 3 steps. This time, she made it across the room. 12 steps. Slow, shaking, tears streaming down her face. Dr. Chin applauded. "That's my girl." Judith called Joseph immediately. "I walked." His voice broke with joy. "Judith, that's incredible. I want to walk into the sanctuary. At the open house. Just a few steps. Could you be there? I wouldn't miss it." The day of the open house, over 200 people came. Parish members, city officials, architects, journalists. Children ran through the space, marveling at the beauty and accessibility. Joseph demonstrated plaster restoration techniques to a rapt crowd. His apprentices gave tours, explaining their work with pride. Diane Voss, who'd once questioned the project, brought her elderly mother, a wheelchair user, and watched her navigate the space effortlessly. "You were right," Diane told Judith quietly. "This matters." Judith's father flew in from Singapore. Jonathan Hartley, emotionally distant for decades, stood in the sanctuary and looked at what his daughter had built. "I'm proud of you," he said, his voice rough with unfamiliar emotion. Judith didn't forgive him. Not yet. But she said, "Stay. I want you to see something." At sunset, with the sanctuary glowing gold from restored light fixtures, Judith stood from her wheelchair. Joseph positioned himself nearby, not helping, just present. She took her forearm crutches and walked. 5 steps into the sanctuary David had helped restore. People applauded, but Judith barely heard them. She was walking. She was alive. The grand reopening was scheduled for a Friday evening in January. St. Adalbert's bells rang for the first time in 5 years, the sound carrying across Pilsen like a promise. Inside, the sanctuary glowed. Restored plaster gleamed. Adaptive seating integrated seamlessly with historic pews. David's crayon drawing, the one of 3 stick figures, hung framed in the narthex beside the project timeline. Judith wore a navy dress and used her forearm crutches, her wheelchair nearby, as backup. Joseph wore a suit David had helped him pick out. David wore his yellow raincoat because, as he said, "It's my lucky coat." The crowd included everyone: parish members, city officials, Hartley Innovations board members, Joseph's apprentices and their families, journalists, accessibility advocates. Richard Pemberton, who demanded audits and questioned Joseph's hire, approached Joseph before the ceremony. "I owe you an apology," Richard said. "I judged unfairly. This work, it's exceptional." Joseph shook his hand. "Thank you." Diane Voss stood at the microphone first. "Tonight we celebrate more than a building," she said. "We celebrate what happens when we invest in people, not just projects. When we trust competence over credentials. When we choose justice over convenience." Then Joseph spoke, his voice steady. "I'm a carpenter. I work with my hands. For a long time, I thought that was all I was. But this project taught me something. Skills matter, but so does being seen. Thank you to everyone who saw us, who believed in us." Judith went last. Her voice carried through the sanctuary. 2 months ago, I spent my birthday alone. I convinced myself I deserved loneliness, that grief was punishment and healing was betrayal. Then a 6-year-old boy in a yellow raincoat reminded me that birthdays should be happy, that everyone deserves kindness. She looked at Joseph and David. This building isn't just about accessibility or historic preservation. It's about second chances, about recognizing that the system breaks people and then blames them for being broken. I'm committing $5 million to the Hartley Restoration Fellowship, funding apprenticeships, medical debt relief, and accessible infrastructure projects. Because if we're serious about justice, we put our money where our mouths are. The crowd erupted in applause. Jonathan Hartley stood, tears in his eyes, and added, "Hartley Technologies will match that commitment. It's long overdue." After the speeches, after the tours, and the press photos, and the celebration, Judith found Joseph and David in the sanctuary. David was touching the restored plaster gently, as if it might disappear. "We did this, Miss Judith," he whispered. "We did, buddy," Judith said. Joseph met her eyes. "What happens now?" Judith smiled. "Now we keep building." That night, Judith returned to her apartment and looked at Sherman, the succulent, and Captain Pokey, the cactus, both thriving on her windowsill. Her phone buzzed, a photo from Joseph. David asleep, clutching his framed drawing, a smile on his face. The caption read, "Happy endings are just new beginnings." Judith set the photo as her wallpaper. Outside, Lake Michigan stretched dark and vast. Inside, warmth and light. Sometimes the smallest kindness reopens an entire city of hearts. Sometimes punishment becomes permission. Sometimes 3 broken people find each other in the rain and build something beautiful from the wreckage. Judith closed her eyes and, for the first time in 2 years, felt not hope but certainty. She was going to be okay. They all were.